Hello, hello, and welcome. This week, I invited a creator that I have known for years, but I never really knew about her artistic process or how she comes up with the ideas for her shows. I jumped on the idea of interviewing her for Pique My Interest. Meet Joy French. She not only approaches dance with a unique view, but she piques my interest with her look on life. Approaching and embracing the world with an open mind to let it speak to her while also finding the humor. She loves collaborating and bouncing ideas off other artists, claiming that she is not brilliant alone. In the creation of pieces along with her own dance company, you will see how brilliant she really is. I do have to apologize. About halfway through, the neighbor dog was let out and wanted to join in on the fun. This episode was recorded in Missoula, Montana, and some time ago, and published now due to me learning how to edit and publish a podcast, so some info might be a little old. But I hope you can still use all of the information to look up their work and your interest is piqued. I hope you're having a grand day, and please enjoy this week's episode I've titled, Digging in the Dirt. Hello, my beautiful people, and welcome to Pique My Interest, a podcast dedicated to creativity. My name is Scoob Decker, and I am an artist. This podcast was created to learn more about different styles of art, and more importantly, meet some incredible artists and explore their craft and how they create. I'm extremely excited today. It is 9:30 in the morning, and it's the earliest I've ever done a Pique My Interest interview, but it doesn't matter because I'm here with Joy French. Joy French, how are you doing today?
I'm good. I like that. I'm a mother, I'm a busy businesswoman, and so now 9:30 is like the time we can do it together.
Wonderful. Can you explain to our listeners what is your craft?
I am a dancer and choreographer.
And what is your specialty within your craft? What makes your work different than other choreographers or dancers?
Well, I consider myself a dance theater maker or within the contemporary dance genre. And I think I'm really focused on telling stories and working interdisciplinarily with text and music and body and design with media as well as set and props and all that kind of stuff. So I come together not just from a what can my body do approach. So I would say, that's a different aspect of how we create in dance versus just like, how can my body move versus what am I going to say with all the components that I can have at my, access, and what are my resources and how can I tell a story, and, or if it's not a story, it might not be a literal story, but how can I discuss a theme with all these other elements that can end up on stage with us. Mm-hmm.
With my expertise being in theater, I love storytelling, and I can vouch for you that all of your work definitely is storytelling, and that's what I love about it. You have started your own company here in Missoula, Bare Bate Dance, and that's one of my most favorite things about seeing one of your shows is how full they are. You're not just going to see some dancers move their bodies in some interesting ways. You're going to see a full story. Mm-hmm. What's your background? Where are you from? Any education? And what was your upbringing that made you into a creator?
I grew up as a competition dancer, mostly in Columbia, Missouri, in the Midwest. So I think sometimes competition dancers have a complicated relationship with art making because competition, the idea of competition is that you're going to compete up against other people. It's not always about artistry as much as technique and did you hit your leg high enough or did you point your toes enough, were you in sync enough, all these different things which are part of our art but gets kind of watered down. The artistry maybe gets watered down in service of these like technical components. But I really think that my history with competition dance, and then I ended up, doing the dance team and doing flags at one point and doing musical theater later on and various things like that, just helped me have more access to performance. Like I learned to perform in different avenues and in front of people who didn't love me. It wasn't a hometown audience. When you go to a competition, you're in front of a bunch of people that frankly probably hope you fall. And so I think I really learned a kind of confidence on stage during that time as I was growing up. And then I ended up, after high school, I went with a group called Up With People. And Up With People is, you tour for a year and you do an hour and a half Broadway style musical, and you travel around the world and you have homestays and you do community service and you perform in every location. And so with the idea that like music and art and the performing arts can bond people across cultures, across language barriers, it's very idealistic and beautiful. And my cast was from 22 different countries. There's 150 of us that traveled. I mean, it was really an exciting year. And again, I just performed a ton I was a featured dancer in the show, and I got to perform a ton. So I think all my early training was just like, how much can I be on stage? That was my whole focus. And then slowly I ended up coming up to the University of Montana and starting to be more and more interested in choreography, which I had always been interested in, but just not a lot of access to someone saying like, here, come choreograph. You know, I didn't have a lot of that. You don't as a teenager often. And so then coming up to the University of Montana, I was not a dance major, but I danced a lot and ended up dancing professionally even while I was an undergrad with Amy Rexdale Studio, Headwaters. It was Motrans at the time. But I think the choreography point really started there of like, I think I can make this as well. And I'm interested in the artistry of it more than just the power of precision or technique. But it really didn't, I don't feel like I started what I would say landing my pieces until I was a little bit further along and I went to grad school at CU Boulder at University of Colorado. And there was a shift there that happened for me of like, I think I'm an okay dancer. Clearly I was like getting gigs and I was like dancing enough. But I think in grad school, in my late 20s, I like found that there's like, I clicked and understand my power as a storyteller and like how I am unique in the way I tell stories and I'm unique in the way I use text on stage. And like I started embracing that as a performer, but then also trying to translate that for other people. So that was really where I think I clicked into this new dance theater within the contemporary dance genre and like understanding the capacity that I have as a performer and then how do I translate that into a group and into a company.
Wonderful. I like how you use the word landing your pieces or landing your choreography. And as an artist, I can kind of understand that. Something's not working, then all of a sudden it clicks. Which brings up an interesting idea of success in art. As an artist, we're always trying to strive for success. Do you consider yourself a successful artist? And what do you consider success in choreographing?
I think it is successful in dance if you are just still dancing. I think there are so many people, and there are these like, I call them like the cliffs, like after high school cliff, or the after college cliff, that like you think you're going to do something, but it's way easier to not dance. It's way easier not to make your art or to do your art. And so I think there's some major drop-offs, high school and college being two of them. And then the rest of the time, it's like we're just all fighting to figure out how to keep dancing. It's hard on the body. It doesn't pay very much money. You're always like scrambling for the elusive gig. And so I would say in my art form in dance, I really believe that if you are still dancing, you are successful. Like, doesn't matter where you're dancing, doesn't matter how you're dancing. If you're moving your body and creating in some way with your body, you're successful. When it comes to me as like a choreographer, director, artistic director, it's complicated because I think the only place that you can have success, if you want to say on a national or international level, is if you're in the big cities. Like, so if we're judging success based on how many people know my name across the country, across the world, then I would say probably no, I'm not successful. If we judge it based on, am I making an impact in my community, and am I being able to collaborate and celebrate local professionals? Do we have successful sold out shows of like my choreography and the company's work? Like, are we collaborating with really interesting art makers that care about these stories we're telling, like all these components? Then I'd say, yeah, totally, feel really successful. And I just feel like I have to pad that because I think it's easy to say it's all or nothing. Like, you either make it in New York or you don't. And it's not that simple, and it shouldn't be. Like, I made my company to be here in Missoula, Montana, because I believe that dancers are allowed to have a quality of life in their professional career and not have to like do the grind in New York or go to LA or San Francisco. And share one bedroom with 5 people. I believe that you can have a quality of life and be a professional dancer. So I wanted to give that access here in Missoula. I don't know what I would have done as a choreographer had I ended up in New York or somewhere else. Maybe it would have been amazing and I would be known internationally, or maybe I would have crashed and burned like so many dancers do because it's hard to live in New York City. So anyway, I think I have a major level of success, and I feel very proud of what we've made here. At the same time, I think it depends on what your value system is.
And I know you consider yourself very happy in Missoula as well. And as
true
an artist, I think that's
also valuable.
Something to take into consideration is balancing happiness with your art form as well. What gets your creative juices flowing? What inspires you to create a piece? What strikes you to start to move? I've seen a lot of your pieces where you are inspired by text.
Yeah.
You've also been inspired by landscape, scenery. Yeah. I love just watching your pieces because once you're watching a Joy French piece, you're just immediately immersed into whatever that feeling is. But how do you create that?
Oh, geez, it's so complicated. I mean, I joke that I title the show first, which is uncomfortable at best because often I'm titling something that's not going to happen for a year and a half down the road. And so I would say I'm always looking, and those titles come from a place, obviously. So I think what my seed ideas for these shows come from like the culture and community around me, and then often through literature on some level, or through the written word, through podcasts. I'm always kind of looking for seeds of ideas around me. And for example, one of my shows, Here Be Dragons, I think I had heard a podcast, and I was about map making and how we used to put dragons and locations of maps, and we would say there are dragons there, don't go there. Like if it was an unknown location on maps, that's kind of, and there's a little bit that's more of a lore than actually true, but like that's kind of how we think about those dragons on maps. Anyway, and I was like, oh, interesting. What happens if we metaphorically go there to those places where there are dragons? Or are they interpersonal dragons? Are they personal dragons? Are they actual dragons? And how could I make a show that feels fantastical? That's not about dragons on stage, but about something kind of shadowy following us on stage. And then it ended up being really watery, so we got boats and we swung boats on stage. So then it kind of spiraled from there. But yeah, there's a lot of text that starts, for example, one of my pieces, Dance Words Dance, started because I wanted to start collaborating more directly with Montana writers and their written word, and then how do I translate writing into dance, with dance, instead of dance, like how would I do that? And the show progressed differently than I thought from there, but that was my seed idea. So I often take this one little, like something that just feels curious to me that I want to dive into more, like this little itch, and I'm like, oh yeah, let's try to mine that and see what happens. For example, my most recent, it was a half evening length, was Hello Winter. And I was like, so how do I make a Christmas show? Like, I've never done this before. I don't know what that means to me. I don't know if I can feel authentically me when I'm talking about presents and Santa Claus and or like all the aspects that might come with the holiday season. Like, how do I mine some material? I come from a place of curiosity of like, oh, what if this was the whole thing? And like I had this, I have in the back of my mind, I might do a piece about pinball machines because I'm just like, oh, that's fascinating. There's a lot of movement involved with that. There's a whole history of pinball machines and whether they were the like social constraint of like where they were allowed or where they weren't allowed, all these other things. I'm like, ooh, that could be something, and maybe it won't ever be. But and then sometimes I do come up with a title. Like my collaborator Kelly Bowman and I were just joking the other day about B+, like how students hate getting B pluses, even though it's a fine grade. And we were joking about how that's a really great title for a show. Like, what if the show is called B plus? Like, don't expect too much. It's just a B plus, folks. So like so sometimes it is just a title. And then sometimes it comes from like deeper research. Sometimes it comes from one little tiny thing I heard one time and I want to dive in more.
Okay. Now, as artists, when we are creating, we definitely see different things and things adapt and change. And you talked about creating a title for a show that you might need to announce 6-9 months ahead. How does your creation process change or adapt and how do you approach that with your season? Like, say you have a piece called Digging in the Dirt, and then all of a sudden you have a big epiphany moment with the air, and you just want to change that whole piece. Does that affect your show? Does it affect the season?
Well, so far I haven't titled something that I wasn't able to somehow mine at least a kernel of. That, like, at least the first scene had some dirt. The rest of it, who knows? So I haven't ever totally did a 180 on, like, an abandon a show idea. Because I think that also, I'm really interested in art within constraints of, like, okay, so I gave myself the title and I have this many dancers and I know the date. Even that is a pretty tight constraint for a lot of artists, that they would be like, can I have a little more time? Or don't know if I can commit to the title yet, or whatever it is. And so I like that. I like the container. That helps me be more creative. And then I really work with my dancers and say, like, okay, Digging in the Dirt. Whew, I gave us that. Like, let's talk about it. Let's figure it out. Do you guys have ideas? Is there music? Is there a book that, that speaks to you about that, or whatever? So we mine it together. And so I always joke that I'm not brilliant alone. And so I don't put all the pressure on myself to, like, come up with 100% of everything. And because of that, I don't actually get that worried. I've worked with Kate Morris, for example, as a script writer, a local writer. And she's done some script writing and some narrative writing for some of these shows. And for example, I love working with her too, because, like, if I say Digging to the Dirt with her, like, I have maybe why I thought about it, but she, as, like, a narrative maker but of language, is going to come up with 20 other things that I did not think about. So I feel like any topic is going to have other angles, and I just have to be patient and find my collaborators and ask the right questions or dig deeper. and it's there. And there's something there that's interesting. And sometimes it goes more personal. Like, so sometimes I think, oh, it's this story about history, or it's this historical moment, and it's actually much more personal. Sometimes I think I'm going to do this specific style of text, maybe in collaboration, and it ends up being more abstract. Like, oh, I don't actually need that text. I'm just abstractly thinking about text. So I think it can shift, but I keep that core seed idea present. One of my first shows I did when I first got to Missoula was called Crack and Yolk, and it was about fertility and women, and, like, when you have a baby and when you don't, and how that works in a community of women, and is there a stigma about, like, you're getting old and you shouldn't have a baby, or you should have a baby, and all these different things. And I was interested in this discussion. I started creating, and then, like, 3 weeks out of the show, I realized it was actually about Medusa and her sisters in Greek mythology. And I had a friend who was like, and we were spinning it, this feminist perspective of, like, who the Gorgon sisters were. And I had a friend who was like, you should totally retitle it, because it's not Crack and Yolk anymore. It's the Gorgon sisters, and people are interested in, like, Greek mythology, and you should, use that. I was like, no, it's still Crack and Yolk. It's just now it's also based on this whole, like, myth of Medusa. And so I had to, like, use the material I had and can craft it just enough that then I could put this other spin on it and add these little scenes throughout that spoke to where I got to with the tech, or not with the text, but with the narrative, which was different than where I thought I was starting. Or I knew I was starting more abstractly, and I got really specific. So sometimes it goes that way too, but it's just fair. I just, like, go for the ride, and it's scary and really fun.
For my peekers out there, it sounds like Joy French is constantly just inspired and just knows where to go. For a lot of artists, we run into creative blocks. How do you overcome a creative block? Or do you even get creative blocks?
Well, I also think, so to be a dancer, I feel like all you have to do is keep dancing. I truly believe that. Like, show up, take a class, show up, do a little performance, maybe do a big performance, show up, teach a class, whatever it is. To be a choreographer, I do think there's something about you have to keep being interested in the art form, like, and reinvested in, like, here I am, I'm going to do this again, and I'm just excited about this new project as I was about the last one. There's something about, like, figuring that out for yourself. That said, I have learned how much I can choreograph in a year, and I think that timeline feels relevant of, like some people maybe can do a great, like, huge new concert every 5 years. Some can do it every 5 months, like, I think there's a timeline of, like, it's like, I think of it as, like, a little depleting the well, and that's not so much on a physical level. Like, I can make moves, every day if I wanted to, but it's more about, like, what do those moves say or do within within the form, within the narrative concert. And so for me, I can do like one big show a year. And like if I try to push much more, I can do like 1.5, I guess. I usually do like a little bit and then I do a big show. And so I've found that if I do more than 2 hours worth of choreography in a year, I am done. I like 1.5 to 2 hours I can do. But after that, I just can't, like, I get like, it's almost like my nervous system starts rejecting, like, I can't make these decisions anymore. But I think that's helpful. So like I give myself time in between big projects. I give myself like a 6-month incubation process for the next project where I'm reading books and I'm talking to people and I'm listening to things and I'm watching movies. And so I'm kind of like in the creative discussion and really like, I try to like wipe the slate clean and start just letting things come in. Because when I'm in creative process, I'm kind of blocking. Like, I don't want to see that because it might influence me. Or that's not yet. I'm not ready to think about that yet. So I block during the creative process and then I open up and give myself this incubation time to like, okay, I have a title maybe, or I have an idea, and what things I might be able to like connect through that. Like, so A, then there's a B, and there's a C, and maybe those 3 things, but I haven't found my B and C yet when I had my A idea. So I'm starting to look for those other components that I'm going to add into the show in that off time. And like I said, I think some people have a longer off time that they need and a longer development. I mean, I think that's different, but I think finding that ratio is important. And I feel really lucky that I've continued to be inspired to do new work and build off of what I did, but I don't really do multiples very often. Usually it's like, totally new show, here we go. But I'm using all the kind of compositional elements that I'm building off of like, how do I construct, how do I bring in interdisciplinary work, all that kind of stuff.
Joy also had a Bare Bate show recently that got to do exactly what she just mentioned, where bringing back a lot of her old shows. There was the 10-year reunion, but that was postponed a few years because of the pandemic, so they had their 12-year reunion where we got to see some of those old shows again, and it was so much fun. Yeah, the art integration of all these different shows using words and movement, well, obviously movement, but just it's the set pieces that you were able to fly in and out, and it's so unique. You've mentioned a little bit about collaboration, and maybe that might help you with your inspiration or creation. How do you choose who to work with, or who speaks to you, and how do you reach out to them?
I think I know that I need people who are kind of going to say yes and to me, which is that like classic improvisation for, modality for theater, but I don't think that's always the best option. Like sometimes I need people to say no to me for sure. But I think in general, I'm looking for people, at least in their kind of like energetically, to be yes ands. Like, oh yes, and let's go find this thing, and yes, or also like sometimes they're also kind of pushing back. But I think I need to feel like I'm in charge of my piece and that I can guide it, and that the people who are coming on as collaborators are interested in moving that piece with me, but not trying to hijack and take it on their own, right? And that doesn't mean maybe they would like make really interesting art and like pull me in different ways. If they really kind of were more combative in their collaboration with me, it might push my art in different ways. But for me, it's really vulnerable to make art. And so I need people, as I bring collaborators on, who are like excited about the direction we're already going. So that's really what I'm looking for.
A little support system.
Yeah, it's a support system. It's someone to like bounce ideas off of, but who generally are excited about the direction it's already going. So I'm not bringing people in who are masters in their own way and are just going to like throw in what they do. They're really coming in as collaborators and are going to help me and look at the movement with me, even if they're not movers, and say, oh, well, I see this. That makes me think about this in my own way, as opposed to being like, oh, you need this one piece of music. Here's a piece of music. Drop it in, right? They're going to come in. They're going to watch. They're going to like be interested in the creative process and where we're going with our themes or with our narratives and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, Joy collaborates with not only other dancers, but as well as musicians and writers. I just think that's so unique for dance. But going back to how Bare Bate frequently tells a story with dance, how does dance tell a story? How does dance push a story?
I think dance can be kind of pigeonholed into beauty, and like ballet is beautiful often, and that doesn't mean there's not other layers, but even if it's like tragic, it's tragically beautiful. Or even if there's tension, it's beautiful tension. There's like this beauty about ballet that I think sometimes the other dance forms fall prey to, like, oh, I'm supposed to be beautiful. Dance is always supposed to be beautiful. I don't agree. Like, dance can be boring. It can be ugly. Dance can be painful to watch. Dance can be like, we have ability in our body to like actually show a lot of range of the human emotion, the human story than I think we're often allowed to do with dance. I think sometimes it can be kind of culturally in America, it can get pushed into this place of like, oh, you dance, you must be really elegant and beautiful. And that is like one aspect of who I am, right? And one aspect of what most of us are. So anyway, so I think of dance as like, okay, how can, like, we're supposed to be physically impressive as dancers, but like, what does that mean to be physically impressive and to like be able to translate something in the body to our audiences, and what do I want them to feel? It's complicated because I think even though I don't always feel like we have to be beautiful, I do want to kind of feel impressive, and I want to show them something that maybe feels like they can't do, which the postmodern dancers in the 60s and 70s were like, I can just stand here and do what you do and it's still a dance form. Okay, great, that helped push the form, but I don't know if that's what I want my dance to be. Like, I still want to feel like we're showing them there's something kind of magical about dancers and we're able to do in the body, but that doesn't always equal beauty. And so when I'm thinking about a moment in a piece, a physical moment with the dancers and with my company, I'm often thinking about like, okay, so this is a moment that I want tension. Well, where does tension live? And how do we make tension? Like, maybe it's tension because we are combative and like we're like flying into one another. Maybe it's tense because we're not touching each other, but we're moving in close proximity. Maybe it's tense because it looks like it should be in unison, but it's not, and we're like fighting tension. So there's like all these different ways compositionally that we can take a feeling or kind of a goal, like a narrative goal, and put it into the body that is just subtle in a way that's not about like, how did you point your toes or not? My dancers are beautiful. They can point their toes, but that's not always what every scene needs. So like, what does the scene need, and how do we craft it so that it's telling the audience something, even if it's a nonverbal, like even if the audience isn't going to say like, that part was the tension part, right? But like they felt the tension, and then we get to release the tension, and maybe they'll feel the release of the tension more than the tension itself. But so I think of it like that, of like, going into a moment, I often create in scenes, and then we kind of figure out how they flow together. But in a specific scene, like I know we need, for example, I did a piece about prison newspapers at the turn of the 20th century, and I knew we needed the prisoners in their cells at some point, and I needed to feel a limitation of space. So they were like claustrophobic in their space. So then we created a whole scene about that claustrophobia, even without walls, you know. And so I think we take a feeling, a more abstracted feeling, and we try to put it in the body, and then we try to feel like, okay, we still have this special skill of being able to dance together and do crazy moves, and like, how can we do all those things at once so that it feels spectacular and also really human? I think I'm interested in kind of both, actually.
Do you ever feel like your competition background, where something is judged and you're trying to be perfect, and then making your way through professional art and realizing that there's no such thing as perfection? Do you ever find that competition background is ever battling with your artistic self now? Whether, like you were talking about, making sure that everybody's feet are pointed, and as much as you want to make sure everybody's comfortable doing what they need to do, but you have this vision of making sure all the feet are pointed.
I'm sure it affects me. I mean, just in that, like, if I hadn't had, like, had I just come into dance as a college student, for example, and had not had, 12 years or 15 years by the time I was finishing or whatever of that background, I'm sure I would be a different dancer. It's hard to totally know how. I would say more than, like, the precision and the perfectionism of competition, I really believe that dance is for the audience. Like, competition dancers show up on stage and they're trying to impress those judges, right? I don't feel like there's judges to impress, but I do want to impress and feel celebrated by my audiences, which is my local audiences, or are my local audiences. And so I think that more than anything, like I want I want that relationship with the audience, and I care about my audience, which I think that really comes from the competition background. I've made very few pieces where I was like, I don't care if anyone likes it. Like, maybe they'll hate it, and that's fine too. Like, I've made very few pieces that I feel like I disregarded the relationship between performer and audience. And definitely some dancers do. Like, they're like, this is the craft, I'm pushing the form, or I'm doing something new that the audience may or may not like it. They may or may not walk out halfway through, and that's okay with me. I think there are some dancers and choreographers who are more comfortable living in that kind of ambiguous relationship with their audience, that like it's a little bit heavier for them on the performance of like what they are making on stage is more important than the relationship maybe between the audience. But I'm also a businesswoman, and so between like probably my competition background and musical theater background and the things that I did that are about the audience and like the judges and that outward facingness, coupled with like I want people to show up. I need people buying tickets to sit in those seats if I'm going to pay the dancers, and so I think that those two things coupled together, I very much care that the audience is interested, and that I think of them as kind of hooks. Like, do I have a hook for the older crew, or do I have a hook for the younger crew, or do I have a hook for the like dance aficionado versus the novice audience member? And I wouldn't say that throughout the process I'm like cognizant of like that scene is gonna get that audience and this scene is gonna get that. I don't think of it quite like that, but I want there to be kind of something for everyone, and that I'm reflecting something about the world to them that they generally are interested in, seeing it manifest in this art form.
Telling stories.
Telling stories.
You mentioned that some people might not like your work. As artists, we are always in fear of criticism. How do you handle criticism? Whether it be bad, good, somebody walking out of your show. You said as an artist, you kind of have to say, I don't need to let that affect me. Think as a businesswoman, you kind of, maybe your feelings are hurt.
Right. I think in our capitalist society and like that on the business side, people criticize the work less directly to me and more by not buying tickets. And so I would say I am aware of that. Like if we have a less a smaller audience base, like a show that doesn't sell as well, I think about it. I'm like, oh, was that just randomly time of year, or was it like was it something about like what we were doing on stage, or was it about there were 5 other shows going on that weekend? Because sometimes it's not about us at all. Sometimes it's about like we did it on Memorial Day weekend. Bad choice. Why did we do that? You did
Scoob's idea, and you did digging in the dirt.
Right.
That's what you did.
And right. And so sometimes I'm aware of that. And then so I think I get less direct feedback and criticism, and more like, where are they choosing to spend their time and money with us? It's the audience. When it comes to like other artists or other people around me that I care about who are giving me feedback and criticism, I don't get it a ton, because frankly I don't have a lot of peers in this community. That's part of the negative part about being in the rural Rocky Mountain West, is that I don't have as many peers as I would have if I was in a bigger city on the coast. But I think, again, like, do I get commissioned? Do I get brought around, or do I not? I think of it more like that. And I think I've just learned a little bit that I have to let it go. And probably the biggest thing I celebrate and feel most positive about that is every year I have more and more dancers who are interested in working with me. I think that's more telling to me than like a random audience member not that interested, or a potential collaborator who's like, not for me. I'm like, that's fine. You're allowed to not to be for you, but are there dancers who want to come into the company and create with me and be my close collaborators? That says a lot about kind of how I'm creating a culture of professionalism, and also like really honoring them as dancers and how we're making things together. So I almost care more about the dancers' criticism of what I'm making than like maybe the outside perspective of it. And I've had enough success and have enough of a following here in my community that feels like, okay, most people think what I'm doing has some value in their life, like I'm adding art to their life. But if I started making work or treating the dancers in a way that they didn't want, or they didn't feel celebrated and didn't feel like, oh, this is not the dance for me, then I would feel a little bit more worried, I guess.
Now, I know you have hobbies. You have a couple kids and you've got a husband. You're frequently outside, you're at home, you're working. Do you find that your hobbies complement your craft, or do they contradict your craft, or do you like them to be separate? Do you like them to influence each other?
I'd say mostly I kind of keep everything separated. Like my dance, especially since my dance feels like it needs its own like greenhouse effect of like being intensely there and like having all the influences that are going to help craft it and grow whatever I'm growing. And then I want to like walk away from that greenhouse and be like, whew, fresh air. And I don't have to think about it for a little bit. And I can watch it, I can look at it from a distance a little bit, but I'm not directly like mining every second to then put back in. I definitely have found that I go home and sometimes I don't even talk about my creative process, and my husband's like, oh, you didn't tell me about that, like weeks later. I'm like, oh, sorry, I should have said that. I don't know. But I've learned that if it's too much all at once, then I never get a break, and then I do get more burnt out. So it's nice to keep, I mean, I'm kind of a workaholic. I work a lot. I'm not saying I don't, but then when I'm off, I really feel like I'm off. Like I don't feel like I don't often like go for a hike and think, oh, this little flower is going to influence what I just did. Like I just go for a hike and enjoy and have a little space, and then I walk back into the studio fresher. And with a little bit of space allows me to kind of clear the cobwebs, and then when I go back in, sometimes I see it more clearly, even if I haven't been consciously working on it or, mining from those hobbies or from those lifestyle moments to go back in.
What other hobbies do you have?
Great question. Do I have hobbies? No, I'm joking. I would say, like, I definitely love getting out into the mountains. That's, one of the lifestyle components that people in Montana come here for, and same with me. So we get out a lot. We try to go on little, outings and trips outside of town of like we have a camper, or we go visit friends and whatnot and try to just get out. Other hobbies, I've done various things at times, but right now it's really focused on the kids, and like that's where, so I guess I have a hobby of motherhood right now, and watching them grow and trying to be really as present for them when I'm not working as possible. I'd say that would be my hobby. and at various times in the past, I've done more visual art, or I've done more writing. And I do consume a lot of podcast media and literary components in my life of reading books and articles and various things about kind of tangential to what I'm doing at the moment, and that influences me. I would say that's probably my most direct influence of like, yes, I definitely read books and listen to things and try to stay up on current the world, various news and whatnot. And so I guess that hobby, and some people really let that go, and I try to do that as much as I can in my free time, and that definitely affects what I'm making. But I would say like trying to be in the mountains, be present with my kids, I would say that's less directly in relation. That's more of my off time, and those are my hobbies: motherhood and hiking.
Wonderful. Now, I'm sure your advice to anybody about dancing is just to go out and dance, do a class, move, turn on some music. But for somebody who's interested in getting into professional dancing or auditioning for Bare Bate Dance, do you have any advice or school recommendations?
I would say most of the dancers who've been in Bare Bate, who've been in my company, have gone through some more intensive program, whether it's like higher ed or some kind of conservatory program, or maybe just kind of more intensive workshops, that kind of thing. I don't know that I've had anyone who hasn't done some level of continuing education, I would say, whether they actually ended up with a degree or not, here nor there. And I think there's something about a dancer who is devoting that much time and energy towards their craft that just makes them a little bit different of a mover versus someone who's like dabbled and not quite sure if they're going to stay in or not, and not really devoting the time. It's really more about the time and the hours, and less about like, oh, you have to go get your BFA, or you have to go, do a year internship or that kind of thing, or apprenticeship. So it's like, do you put the hours in to focus on your own craft? And then I think the other thing is just that you could have done that and you're still just not the right dancer for the company. Even here in Missoula, Montana, where it feels like, oh, you would imagine like there's not that many professional dancers. There's plenty. When you're only looking for like 5 to 10 dancers every year, we have plenty. who are highly qualified, who are interesting movers, collaborative, all those kind of things. And the truth is I just can't take everyone. And so like even within our community, there's definitely people I have to turn down that you've done all the right things, you've like checked all the boxes, and you're not the right fit for my company. That does not mean that you wouldn't be a great fit for someone else. And so I think that's also just part of the reality of being a professional that makes it hard at any of the performing arts, is like you just might not be the right person. That said, I do think like the more you just invest in your craft and the more hours, you put in, you're going to find someone who's like really excited to work with you. Sometimes I have people who audition and I know they really haven't been dancing, and it's like, well, you haven't been doing the work. Like I can see that. Like even if you have talent, you just haven't been doing the hours kind of. And physically as we get older, things start to change. Like we have to stay strong and we have to be doing our cross training of Pilates or yoga or weight training or whatever it is. And so that also with dance really matters. Like someone who's just like physically capable versus like I have talent, but I haven't danced in 3 years very consistently because I've been focusing on making money. I mean, there's like or focusing on different career path, or there's lots of reasons, but like we see all those things. But I would just say like in general, unfortunately, just like anything in the performing arts, you're going to be kind of it for the dancer, or for the it as a dancer for that choreographer or not. I remember one person telling me like, you're going to show up if you go to New York, you're going to show up and you're going to say like, this is the company I want to work for. They're amazing. And then they're only going to take like 5'2" blonde women. And you're like, not a 5'2" blonde woman. You're a man, or you're, like you're non-binary, or you're black, or you're like whatever it is. And like, you can love that company, but you're not going to be it for that company, and I think that's true on some level for every company. That's not, even if we don't have that like as specific of a physical limitation, which I think a lot of companies don't have as much anymore. That was more of an older idea of like, oh, I can just say I want everyone to be over 5'10". Well, like, okay, maybe, but maybe we have like more understanding of like, well, what if there's a 5'2" dancer who's amazing, right? And so anyway, but for every company we have something that we're looking for that's like intangible, and maybe we have some tangibles, but like it's something intangible that like you may or may not fit into it, even in what people consider like an easy company to get into, like Bare Bate, because we don't have a lot of competition, but actually you do.
Are there any other misconceptions about your craft?
Well, besides it all has to be beautiful.
That's a big one.
I think in general people are surprised that we do these evening length pieces that kind of feel more like a play, but they're not a play. Mm-hmm. I think people expect us to do shorter pieces connected to music, like it's all about the music, and I really push back against that. I don't use music in that way. Music often comes later, or I get it created. I commission musicians to make new pieces, or I just don't use that much music in my shows sometimes, like whatever. I think that there's a misconception that to dance you must have music, and in my part of my little corner of the dance world, you don't. Like, we don't need to have music, and music does not always come first, and for me it rarely does. So I think that's a misconception, and with the style I'm working with. Besides that, I think there's a misconception that like dance is for the youth. And so you dance when you're a high schooler or a 10-year-old into high school. Maybe you dance in college, and then maybe Broadway. People like don't know what happens after that. And or maybe you do like a Taylor Swift tour. Sure, that makes sense. I just think we don't as a culture really see dance as part of like a fulfilled career. And so that's a little problematic. And that means people aren't really paying for that often. They don't know what it means to like go see a professional show, and what's the ticket price, and should I be donating, what are they doing up there, and how much are they getting paid, and like all those dynamics I think is complicated. So that's another misconception. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, just lightening the feel a little bit. Do you have any funny or interesting stories or events that have happened with Bare Bate Dance? Just off the top of your head.
Oh, I mean, I just had this great alumni show, so it was so fun to bring back dancers who haven't been on stage in a long time and have been focusing on different parts of their careers maybe, and then coming back onto stage has been so much fun, and along with the company. And so there was lots of dynamic of like that coming together, and how it's just so fun to celebrate. I don't know if it's like funny, but it's so fun to celebrate the longevity. We've had 12 years of the company, and getting to see everyone come back together and be excited about like reminding the alumni how exciting it is to be on stage. And they might not be able to ever come back in as full company members because their lives have moved in different directions. But so that was just wonderful. As far as shows go, I mean, it's funny. It's it's the work for me. It's my job in a way that, and I'm very like pragmatic as I think about how I work. And so it's not like I'm not looking for, it doesn't feel exceptional. It feels like work. And in this way that I actually really love, because I think art is exceptional, but I also love that I get to be in a place where it's like, yeah, it's like going to work, like in the office scenario, like if you were an office worker, there would probably be some fun components, there would be some drudgery, there'd be some like group team building, and there'd be some moments where you feel really isolated, and all those things happen to me in art making nowadays, which I love because it becomes like the humdrum of everyday work environment for me. And I feel so lucky that my humdrum of everyday work environment is in a theater and is on stage and is with dance and with an art form. And so I don't know that I have any like specific like little moments, but I just feel lucky that I get to be bored and excited and all the things, all the feelings in my daily life with my career choice as a, artistic director and choreographer.
Yeah, that show that in specific, I mean, there was just so much emotion between all the performers just because of all the years that have happened, or maybe even years that haven't happened, and then coming back, and you can just see that on stage, the power and the emotion, and you just get that with every Bare Bate Dance show, is the power and the emotion, and you're not only going to see probably the best dance in Missoula, but you're also going to feel something too. I love that.
Thanks.
What's next for the world of Bare Bate Dance?
Yeah.
What's next for the world of just dance in general? I know I bring this up a lot because we see technology being incorporated into art forms, and I'm just more interested from the artist. Do you feel that the art form is going to change or adapt in the future?
Well, I mean, I think the most interesting work that's going on in the field, and I would say this is like across the board, not just in contemporary modern dance, but like also on Broadway or also in LA, or is like people, choreographers and dancers who are really blending genres. And so even on Broadway, something like Hamilton has a ton of dance in it, and it's something totally new that we hadn't seen because of the approach, right? Or and then how does how do the big budget shows in LA or the tour shows coming out of there, or in Hollywood, like how are they incorporating movement and dance and things like, like even feature length narrative filmmaking that then is incorporating more choreography and its aesthetic and sensibility. I mean, I think that's where dance is exciting. Like whether it sits back on the heels of concert dance or moves forward into the like other lands of theater or film, it's like that collaboration and that moment. We do with Bare Bate, we have a film festival every year, and it's screen dance films, which really what I'm looking for as the director for that is really films that are not just setting up a camera in a studio and watching amazing dance, but like, what is this form of film and how can that make dance look and feel different than we could do on stage or in the studio? And so I think the more as art makers we start collaborating with different people and bringing different elements and bringing more and more video onto the stage with us, and or putting ourselves in video, like all these things, I think is which we're already doing. I would say in the last like 20 years that has been the progression more and more. But I think the more we do that, there's something more there that people are going to see and feel dance and feel its importance, I think, in different ways as we take it from the like, it's a pretty dance on a concert stage to like, oh, there's all these components that dance can engage with, from set design to the media arts element and smart stages and all this type of stuff. But so I think that's continuing to be where the most exciting work is going, I think, in kind of across the board. And wherever dance lives, the people who are really working in interdisciplinarily with other people and putting interesting things on stage and film together, as opposed to just this one narrow kind of mindset of, did you point your toes enough, right? I mean, that's probably not going to push the field, right? Still really important, but not going to push the field. As far as Bare Bate Dance goes, it's kind of similar. We've taken over the West Side Theater, so we have our own venue. And I am becoming more and more aware of like being able to have a venue space that's both my rehearsal space as well as my performance space allows me to start designing in that space and looking at it within rehearsals in different ways of like, oh no, this is where we could bring this set piece on, or we could fly things in, or let's start working with projection in rehearsals because we can have that all set up and just plug in, as opposed to being like, can we bring the psych down in the studio that we're in, and can we bring, and I think probably a lot of people who end up being able to rehearse on the location that they're also performing start to feel like a deeper sense of ownership to the work as in a theatrical way, not just in a rehearsal way early on. So that's really exciting for Bare Bate, I think, is how can I, like, one of the future things I want to do in the next year or two is like a larger scale set design that we can like climb on and engage with and move around, and like which we've never done, because usually if we're rehearsing in small studios around town and then moving into a theater, we don't have time to build and design like that. So that's one of the things that I'm most excited about, which kind of speaks to a little bit where I think the field is going, but on a like just a like practical level, it's going to really change things for us.
Awesome. And what's next for you personally? You excited for any adventures or trips or anything coming up soon?
I think this is going back to the business of dance. I'm the ED of the organization in addition to the key choreographer, and I get to develop the West Side Theater as a venue that can support dance and movement artists, both near and far. And so it sounds kind of like dorky, but I'm really excited to be like, how can we grow the budget? How can we get people from all over the world to be interested in coming to Missoula, Montana? And that's going to fulfill me in a different way and let me see art in different ways. And, just like, so I think that's kind of dorky, but like, I want to be like a $2 million budget theater space within the next like 5 years. And so that's going to take some work. So I think that's where I'm at. I'm definitely in that mid-career place of like, I've come up, I've earned my place. We have this brick and mortar business now, 12 years in, or we actually got it about 11 years in. And then, and now what can we do? How can we launch now that we've done all this foundational work to build where we're at? I feel like we're just on the verge of moving forward. And like on a personal life, like my kids are tiny, so we're going to be here. Like I can't say like, oh, I'm going to do like a 2-year residency in Australia, or something like that. Well, I mean, I could, but it's like, I'm going to want to continue to help my family stay supported and stable. Most likely here. I have my company here. There's no major push to leave. And so I'm really excited to like, how does that launch Bare Bate? But then also like, we have a very unique power in the state of Montana that like not anyone else is really doing what we're doing. And so to be able to bring art and help it thrive more here and collaborate with more artists so that Missoulians and Montanans get access to that, and that like changes, your life when you see art. So I'm really excited to be on the like forefront of that push in the state, which has been lacking, I'd say, in the last little bit.
Not too many dancers or choreographers get excited about the corporate side of things.
I'm like, I want budget stuff. Talk about grants with me.
Joy French wants change. It's great. It's wonderful. Do you have any questions for me?
What do you want from Pique My Interest? What's your goal?
My goal is just to learn as many different art forms and meet as many different artists as possible. The creation of this podcast was incepted because I was just interested. I love the art integration, art on top of other art forms, and how we can teach other aspects using art. And so this was kind of created in my quest to just learn. And not only that, but I wanted other artists to learn as well and just get inspired, as well as learn different techniques and possibly maybe overcome a barrier by just learning how Joy French goes about her business. Or she goes outside and she goes for a hike, so maybe I'm going to try and do that. So I'm really hoping to just inspire artists to just create.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I do think across the board, kind of burnout, I think that question that you asked about burnout, or a little bit like how do you re-inspire or something, maybe I said burnout, but I can imagine that it could be really true in all arts. And I mean, you're an artist and you're around other artists. like, how do we feel fulfilled and successful and pay our bills and not burn out? And like, definitely in the dance field, there's this push of like, since you don't make a lot of money performing or choreographing often, unless you're at like the 1% upper echelon of our field, it tends to be true that then like, oh, you're working, you're trying to like teach 20 classes a week and go to 20 hours of rehearsal and do every show, little or big, that is in town, whether they're paying you or not. And I think the accumulation of all the grind of an art is like really crazy with burnout. And I'm sure that's true with dance, but I'm sure there's different levels. Like ceramists probably feel it in a different way than like dancers do versus musicians do versus painters or tattoo artists or whatever. And I hope we all are able to like support each other of like, the grind is not the art. And
Right.
I think sometimes it's all the same thing.
Yeah.
If you're not like hitting the pavement hard, then you're failing at your art, and I hope we're able to support each other in that way.
Yeah, and I definitely wanted this podcast to focus on art being different values, whether it be a hobby, whether it be your career, whether it be a side project. I interviewed recently a couple ladies who started their own theater company because they just didn't feel like there was enough opportunity around. And it is 100% a side project for them. I've also interviewed some people where their craft is their career. And just to kind of hear the different lifestyles and the different focuses and how people go about it, I find it very fascinating. And I just hope other people do as well.
Yeah, it's great.
Wonderful. I can't thank you enough for being here and joining me and piquing my interest about Bare Bate Dance. Thank you, Joy French. And thank you to all my peakers out there. Please let me know if there are any special or unique artists or art forms you think I should explore. Remember, creativity comes from the heart. Push yourselves. Be kind to each other. I'm Scoop Decker, and thank you for helping me pique my interest.